Welcome to MACMA's Audience Architect, where we are crafting the future of audience engagement. Our mission is to dive into the intricacies of the ever-evolving media and publishing landscape through the sharp lens of audience and marketing professionals. Each episode will unravel the meaning and perspective on trends that are shaping the industry. Welcome to episode number 9 of the Audience Architect podcast. I'm your host, Carla Zanoni. Let's architect the future. I am so excited to welcome Ryan Y. Kellett, who is Vice President of Audience at Axios Media, where he spearheads initiatives to elevate brand awareness and enhance engagement across diverse platforms. Notably, he pioneered the establishment of an in-house team of influencers on Instagram for Axios Local, amplifying the platform's reach and resonance. Before Axios, he spent 11 years in the newsroom of the Washington Post in various leadership roles while building out SEO, social, data, newsletter, and subscriber acquisition and retention teams. He was also an author of the proposal on comments and communities that would become the Coral Project. Along the way, he covered 3 U.S. presidential elections and contributed to high-profile projects like the police shootings database and opioid files. Ryan and his teams have won multiple Edward R. Murrow, Juan Ifrah, Webby, and Online Journalism Awards. Ryan is currently on the board of the Online News Association, ONA, and a Blue Engine Collaborative Coach, an organization dedicated to coaching news organizations of all sizes since 2016. Ryan is also a 2021 graduate of the Asian American Journalists Association's Executive Leadership Program. And he got his start founding a microlocal blog as a student at Middlebury College and started his journalism career at NPR as its first social media intern. And we'll talk about this later, but I've also sleuthed that deep down inside, Ryan is a foodie at heart. More on that later. Ryan, I'm so glad to welcome you to the show. Thank you for spending your time with us.
Happy to be here, Carla. Thanks so much.
Thanks. So I want to start in a broad kind of 100K up in the sky kind of way. I read your pitch to join the Online News Association, or ONA, an amazing group that was founded in 1999 to inspire and support innovation and excellence in digital journalism. I've been a member for a long time myself and know how important their work is. So congratulations on that board appointment. In that pitch, you outlined a comprehensive view of the challenges facing digital journalism today, including sustainability, local news deserts, misinformation, and more. And I'm wondering, can we start from there? For our listeners, can you lay some of the groundwork for what you're seeing broadly across the industry and what really you feel are some of the most pressing issues that we're facing in journalism and media today?
Yes, absolutely. It's a very tough time in the media industry. I mean, in some ways, it's kind of always has been, but it just feels particularly. It feels hard right now, and it just feels difficult to kind of move. A lot of the media reporting itself focuses on layoffs in the industry, and that's a big challenge, right? The ability to continue to have journalists kind of participate in doing journalism, right? That in and of itself is a really big deal. But outside of that, that sort of surrounds that, we don't talk as much about some of the other pieces that are sort of driving this kind of moment that feels so bad, right? We've got all kinds of things happening. We have, obviously the business model challenges right now, and that's something I focus on a lot. We're talking about, particularly my specialty, web-driven businesses and where they're going. We've got, news deserts, becoming a huge piece of the conversation in the local space. AI. Let's not focus, let's not forget I'm sure we'll come back to this in this conversation, but everybody and their mom wants to talk about AI and how it is either going to enable journalists to a beautiful future or perhaps take us all down in one fell swoop. I think the one that sort of matters to me the most is I really look at news avoidance, as an audience person, and we can get into this later, is that news avoidance is a really interesting and pernicious challenge right now, something that is not talked a lot about because from a purely business point of view, you're focused on sort of the available audience who is willing to already be engaged. But the audience right outside that are people who are really avoiding news or that are fatigued by what is out there right now. They don't want to get into the what is potentially a really negative headspace when they read the news every day. And so those are among a few things. The list goes on: DEI rollbacks, changing platforms and for distribution. But I really think that in my O&A pitch, I was sort of saying like, hey, if any of these resonate with you, my hope is that you don't try to just go it alone and bang your head against the wall on all of these all at once, because each of these deserves an individual attention from some really smart and interested individuals on these challenges. And instead of saying, hey, let's try to wrap our arms around all of them at once, how do we wrap our arms around maybe one or two at a time? And then understand how to perhaps hand off some of that other work and say, hey, that's not for me, that's not my challenge, but it's an important challenge in the industry that is worth talking about and learning from others.
I love in that pitch, you emphasize the importance of transparency and that collaboration that you're talking about. And it sounds like a lot of the work that you've done has really been centered on creating those spaces where individuals within, let's say, a news organization come together, work on one key area that you're looking to solve, and then share that information throughout the newsroom. So first of all, if you could speak to how that works, I would love to hear that. And also, how do you then get out of the bubble of your news organization and share that in a transparent, collaborative fashion for the betterment of journalism as a whole? It's such a competitive time and space, especially with what you're mentioning around layoffs and the contractions of some of these newsrooms. How can organizations and individuals come together to address those issues?
I'm a fiercely competitive person, and maybe I learned this at the Washington Post or whatever it was, but I am really loath to give away the secrets. Maybe that's a little bit of the Bezos kind of piece that we picked up over the time. So it is definitely learned from me to sort of say be generous, get out there and give ideas, share what you can, share what you know with other people. Even award entries. I'll give you a little example. I would be I don't want to give away too much in this award entry because, a competitor, mainly the New York Times when I was at the Post, right, would say, oh, this is how they're doing it. And I will, and we'll figure out their secret sauce. And I've done a full 180 on this. I just really, really believe that that's just no longer the main thing, right? If you have something that is working, shout it from the rooftops. That is really, really, really important. And it kind of gets to the two pieces you talked about, the internal and the external. And so at Axios, we really celebrate wins where we find them because they're hard earned. They're really kind of tough to come by. And so we think about, all the small and big ways to celebrate those, get those out in the open space. And, the setup of Axios, I think, is in a way really focused around sort of owning individual lanes or challenges that we have as it is. And so it becomes a little bit easier to sort of say, hey, when you have something, we use an internal piece of software to sort of elevate some of those key wins and share them with one another and then ask questions about that. And so I think that's really, really good. And then externally, I think part of it is, industry organizations and other pieces, I think are great ways to do that. I sort of joke about the awards thing, but awards too, right? I was looking at the INMA awards the other day and they have two categories of AI. And I pointed out on my social media, hey, like this is the one of the first times we're seeing truly AI categories kind of come out, and they have nominees in those categories. So I went and I looked, hey, what are these entries saying? Because it's so hard to come by some of that information. You might have small corners of the internet that are sort of talking about, hey, how are you doing this workflow thing, or how are you bringing this project out to your readers in that particular way? And it's hard to know, right? A lot of those things. And so I actually think awards and award spaces can be a really interesting way to sort of aggregate some of that information together for the first time and kind of bring that out, along with obviously organizations that do more sort of kind of longitudinal research and things like that bring out audience sort of insights in that way. And that can help spur discussions when you have a little bit of data and you say, hey, I haven't done that survey of our audience, but externally I see those things. And that's how the kind of internal and external work together in my mind.
I love what you're pointing out. And I would say, so first of all, the award spaces, that's such a great resource and such a good tip to really be considering. And you're right, especially with AI. It's so many people are tight-lipped about it because first of all, we're all experimenting, but also there's such an advantage to figuring this out first. I'm curious, for us to talk a little bit about Axios, when I'm thinking about this still somewhat new organization, right? It's fewer than 10 years old. I think you're coming up on your 10-year anniversary soon. I believe it's 9. This is an incredibly competitive space, especially as we see the contraction of digital publications that had come out in the past, 15 years, decade, et cetera. And Axios is, I would say, at the forefront competitively. I'm curious, as we look at Axios specifically, one point that you've made is, how you define your type of audience development work. The title of VP of Audience can encompass just so much: organic, off-platform, on-platform, paid, social, etc. How do you think about your role? I think that will be a really important part for us to create a foundation so that we understand how you tap into all of these different areas. What is your job description?
My job description has changed a lot over the years, but I think the idea, the way that I practice what I call audience in this way is to do it from an editorial point of view. It's not, I imagine this is similar to how you have thought about it, Carla, in some of your past lives, particularly at the Journal. Like, I think the idea that some of the sort of most interesting insights and interesting sort of powers you can gain as an audience engagement professional comes from the ability to work directly in the news. So not, adjacent, or, hey, we're collaborating, or half, extending a hand to your colleagues in X department, but really from within. So I report to an editor-in-chief right now, Sarah Gu. And my ability to sort of navigate in the newsroom is really, really important, because it's not, oh, hey, I feel a little bit awkward sort of reaching out to a reporter or an editor. It's no, like, I talk to them all day long. I'm in the managing editors meeting every morning and every afternoon, and in that way. And so that in itself is the foundation that allows a little bit of fence sitting. So sort of the different sort of fences that I see within, an editorially driven organization. So I might sort of say, hey, I'm going to spend, a good part of my week working with the product and tech teams, or, the next week might be, the marketing and communications teams. Those might be different parts of the organization. That might be the same part of the organization. It might be, working with our, revenue teams in different ways. It might be an advertising-driven revenue team, a subscription-driven revenue team. And all of those things are sort of plugging the pieces together can be really, I think, are helped by sort of centering that work within the newsroom. Because often what I have found is, if you're not in the newsroom, you can have a hard time sort of bumping up against that firewall. What that means for me, though, is I have to be really, really confident in my firewall Basically I have to be so adept in being able to translate back and forth that I don't feel that awkwardness. And so that if I don't feel that awkwardness, other people don't feel that awkwardness either. And so that's how I really see it, and hopefully deliver value to some of the other parts of the organization, and including to the editorial part of the organization. Because one of the things I really believe in is that editorial should be seen as this one of the revenue drivers, not just sitting there and sort of saying, "Hey, we're sort of out here, as a cost center, kind of hanging out, just trying to like move things along, and brand awareness forever," right? Like there are real things that are tied to newsroom activities, in different types of businesses, and whether you're doing content marketing or you're doing more traditional editorial and publisher-driven work, you have to be really, really confident in doing that. And hopefully, I think the ability to do that, right? It's hard to do when you're earlier in your career, because you don't quite know the sort of the shades of gray that you're sort of getting into, which is why I do tend to protect some of my staff from that. But the idea that the more senior you are, the more you've been in some of these conversations, the more you can have conversations that go back and forth, just like an editor-in-chief might, or a managing editor might, in that way.
I'm laughing and smiling because I feel this deeply in my bones. I am curious if one of my favorite things about Axios is its focus on audience, and I'm curious if that focus on audience is an advantage for someone in a role like yours. I just wanted to read a little bit here. Jim Vanderhei, Axios's co-founder with Mike Allen, said that the publication's mission is clear: get people smarter, faster. And my favorite part of Axios's mission is the value statement, which starts with audiences. Amazing. I'll read those guiding principles. Audience first, elegant efficiency, smart always, no BS for sale, and excellence always. And I think it's worth just going a bit deeper. The company's values state 3 points: audience first, deliver the cleanest, smartest, most efficient, and trustworthy experience; excellence, strive for excellence in everything you do and never sell BS to Axios's audience, customers, or each other's; and then the last one, candor, remain direct and candid in respectful but unambiguous ways with the audience and each other's. A lot of companies have value statements. I've worked for amazing organizations that have value statements. Few are this clear, articulate, and audience centered. The word audience is in there in every single value that's listed here. Incredibly clear and articulate. I'm wondering, to the question I was asking at the beginning, how much do you think that has helped to clarify and be very clear in the work that you're doing when you are working with these different teams? And how does that play out day to day?
It's really helpful to have a company set of statements that help drive everything that we do. We talk a lot about these items in our day-to-day work, using those exact words: audience first, candor, and that is something that can help sort of cut across a lot of what would, in other organizations, I think, be squabbles, right? A little bit of territorial, kind of a little bit of a, hey, don't tread on my lane, become a lot easier when you feel like you're headed in the same direction and you're working on similar things with similar values. And so I'm not saying that resolves everything. Of course not, right? There's a lot of really talented people, smart people who are ambitious and are trying to make something work within their own goals. I sort of mentioned owning your lane before. So it's not a cure-all, but it really, really helps to have these statements so clearly set out from the beginning. And that's something that comes from being a somewhat young organization, right? Jim Vandehei, Roy Schwartz, And Mike Allen really, set that up from the beginning to be able to say, hey, we can refer back to that. It's not, forever etched in stone. We actually had to, do a little bit of editing when it came to AI as well, because, but we talked about it as an organization. And I think like that's a good example where, these guiding principles can be really, really helpful when we want to do work that is cross-functional in that way. I mean, even if not, in all honesty, like I think that's the thing that can really help. And for a journalistic organization, right, audience first is not is actually kind of in some ways a somewhat newer idea, right? It's sort of it's always been more kind of like internally reflective. Before it's like, well, what do we think is the best as the editorial minds, right? That we can sort of then hand down to our audiences in the past. And people forget that. That's a very modern idea to sort of say, how do we serve our audiences for what they need? And so then it comes down to, okay, well, how do you define that audience, right? Who are we actually talking about? And so for Axios, we call these people smart professionals. That's who we're talking about when we talk about our audience in that way. We can get a little bit more specific as we go, but I think the idea that Axios is not a general news site. We are not for every single person on the planet. And that is a big jump from my days at the Washington Post, where the Washington Post really was trying for a very broad and massive audience. And so that can be something that is a worthy conversation to have, because if you ask 10 people around the organization in different departments, who is our audience, and you come up with different answers, that's kind of a problem, right? That means you're not really talking about, you're not having a shared conversation. Even if you said audience first in your value statement, you're probably not talking about the same audience. And then you're back to the same challenges that you had before.
Well, I also think one of the other words that really stood out to me in that statement was the word customers, which I have to say, some of our audience that's listening today, if you're not in the journalism world, that might seem like a strange statement. But to your point, even talking about audiences the way that we do now is fairly new for these newsrooms. And even more so thinking about a customer, somebody where there's actually like an exchange of currency for the product, which again is a very strange concept considering subscribers to newspapers are, this is a very old concept. But that firewall that you were describing, in many ways is there to protect journalists from being influenced from that need. But increasingly, we're seeing that audience professionals, product people who are in newsrooms, all sorts of different leaders are in newsrooms and also serving as a bridge to the quote unquote business side, who's making business decisions that are directly tied to revenue. But to your point, you are working on products that have direct ties to revenue. I'm curious, when I take a look at Axios's range of products, it's a rich assortment of free and paid products for its audience, right? We have like membership, high-end pro subscriptions, free newsletters, sponsorship, ads, job boards. I'm wondering, what are the cornerstones, particularly for you as an audience professional, coming to the table, thinking about this array of products? What are the cornerstones that you're applying and referring back to as you're thinking through your work and how to ensure that this is the most effective and successful assortment of offerings for Axios?
So I really look at it as how do we sort of capture a large enough audience that we are able to then perhaps sort of guide them toward a specific product in that way. And so the idea that, this might be a more traditional marketing funnel in this to some people, but to me, the some of the guiding principles for that are you can't have a product at the end that has too few people that you are that this sort of it reaches, right? If you have a super high end pro subscription, you're ultimately going after a very high dollar high lifetime value type person. But for the most part, you want to have, I really focus on the areas of the business that are driven by having a broad audience to begin with that needs to become familiar with the brand. So very, very easy to do when I was at the Washington Post, very easy brand to work with because a lot of people know what the Washington Post is, but not that many people actually know what Axios is. And so the ability to sort of say, hey, you need to know what Axios is, and then we can sort of get you into a variety of different products, I think is super, super important. And that is something that feels like it falls primarily on me to be able to get people interested, even in the consideration set, before you get into, hey, which product are you sort of are you targeting? Then beyond that, right, we have to have some alignment on what how are we serving this reader? And because journalism pieces or journalism sort of businesses tend to have a multi-sided marketplace, I think is the term for it here, right there, where you may be trying to build a product that has an advertising component and is trying to also serve the individual consumer, and also is, maybe you might have an events piece, or it might, you might be trying to kind of line up and stack together a few of those pieces. And a great product probably does have a couple elements that can come forward in that. So I look at sort of what I've been working on most recently in Axios Local, for instance. We're building this group of influencers that are specific to local cities. And so I started with that same idea. How are we reaching a large group of people to begin with, and building that brand, introducing Axios, and then sort of saying, okay, how are we building a multi-sided business as part of that? So in this particular case, it would be advertising on that social channel. And in addition, right, how do we, bring those people into a newsletter, which is its own channel, which has sponsorship against that channel as well. And then, beyond that, we obviously would want to, integrate events and other things like that as well. Now, we're pretty far from where that blue sky can head, but you have to start somewhere, and you have the ability to say, okay, but how does this serve the audience to start? And are we meeting them where they are? I mean, that's sort of the secondary question that is really important to a lot of audience professionals. In this particular case, I was looking on Instagram. Instagram is the new Facebook, and I think that's a really important place that we are kind of blanketing those spaces in those cities. And then, beyond that, the ability to sort of say, okay, let's build something here around these individuals and these accounts, which is a two-pronged piece, right? It's not just the individual, it's not just the brand. We're looking at bringing those two pieces together. And then the ability to, when those accounts grow in that way, the ability to sell against those brands and individuals as things pick up.
And we'll be right back. Step into the heart of the media evolution at MACMA Industry Day, taking place on April 4th, 2024 at Hearst Tower, NYC. The Media Audience and Content Marketing Association is bringing together the brightest minds in the media world, offering an exclusive glimpse into the future with our theme, Unlocking ACE, Innovative Strategies in Acquisition, Content, and Engagement. Imagine a day filled with insights from industry leaders like Jacob Donnelly on the triple threat industry trends, Anne-Marie Dooling of Gannett USA Today's perspectives on experimentations in the news industry, or Casey Cornelius's strategies on data-driven engagement. Engage in a live Audience Architect podcast with Joetta Gobel of Dotdash Meredith, and cap off the day with cocktails and conversations that could shape your next big idea. This is more than an event. It's a catalyst for growth and innovation in your career. Make sure you're in the room where it happens. Dive into the future of media by registering at www.the-macma.org, the-macma.org. Join us at MACMA Industry Day and unlock the secrets to mastering audience and monetization in the digital age. Your next big opportunity starts here. And now back to our show. I'm so glad that you're talking about your influencer strategy. I was so fascinated. If you want to talk about new terminology that's hit newsrooms, the idea of having influencers, you know, working in collaboration with influencers in different cities or different coverage areas, et cetera. This is as new as it gets. And the word influencers, from my experience, has been a really touchy word in newsrooms. I've actually been, you know, kind of surreptitiously danced around it, call them creators and partners and things of that nature, right? Lest I have the raised eyebrow of a journalist. And I'm wondering, can you tell me a little bit about what that looked like? How did you get to this place where there was a comfort to experiment in this area? And maybe even define what is the difference between an on the ground reporter in one of these areas versus an influencer? How do you see that?
So I did some dancing of my own. I definitely was parsing those terms real tightly. If you read some of the job descriptions I wrote at the time, I was like, well, they're creators, and really thinking about my audiences, some of which were internal. And I'm not trying to lose the newsroom sort of buy-in for that idea. So I have really thought about the ability for us to think about them perhaps as instead as experts. And so this is something that is just levels up to a whole sort of subject matter expertise strategy at Axios. We're very comfortable with reporter-driven exercises. So you'll notice that all of our newsletters tend to have a lead or a set of lead authors. We promote them very, very heavily alongside the Axios brand, obviously. But I think I've cut myself very lucky that we have a culture that really celebrates that. We're the ability to say, hey, this person is an expert, and the reason to follow Axios is to get access to them in that way. And so it's not that far of a leap between that and sort of saying, well, here's an expert for this particular city. And so Axios Local is in 30 cities right now. We have reporters in all 30 cities, and that is awesome. We have an amazing newsletter product in those 30 cities that we serve. But the business challenge that we had was, especially the further west you go in the country, people don't know what Axios is. So this gets back to what I was saying, is like the awareness factor was just wild. And actually the resources and the time it takes to create a newsletter product every single day. Now, most of these markets are sending 5 days a week, plus perhaps a weekend send, plus a Thursday afternoon send as well. So up to 7-8 sends a week. They actually do not have time as reporters in these cities to be able to say, hey, I'm also out there on social. I'm also out there trying to promote the brand. I'm doing events. I'm doing these other things. And so part of sort of breaking off a really some of the most top funnel kind of activities here is to be able to say, hey, let's have a person or two really focused on the top, tippy top of the funnel, introducing Axios to these local markets for the first time. And what are they experts in? They're experts in their cities. And that in and of itself really is subject matter expertise. And I that is just as valuable as, let's say, one of our national newsletter writers who is focused on markets or on the Federal Reserve, or all these different pieces that Axios is known for. Axios is often known for politics, right? We have amazing political writers, and so I just don't think it's that big of a jump to go from, hey, I'm an expert in Congress or specifically the Senate, and saying, actually, we also have a San Francisco social host that is an expert in San Francisco, and bringing Axios out to new readers in a city like that.
And I'm out of curiosity because one of the reasons that I wanted to speak to you, obviously, is all of the amazing work you're doing now. But it really speaks to my heart that you got your start in micro local, as someone who got her start in community and hyper local. I'm curious. What is the coverage that you're doing in those local spaces? Like what those 5 to 7 to 8 newsletters a week? Can you give me a sense of the mix of coverage there?
The mix is super important to us. We don't want to be a place that is all one thing, right? If we're going to send a general newsletter at 6:30 in the morning or 7 o'clock in the morning in your market, hey, what we know from readers is readers want a little smattering of the things that they need to know. What are the conversations they're likely to have today? That might include a little local politics, a little government accountability. And we do hire really, really serious reporters in these markets to do that work. But equally, they're also looking for, hey, did the local sports team win or lose last night? And what's going on with that, right? They're also looking for food and lifestyle, right? What is the restaurant opening in this community that is people are buzzing about? And so that balance of having a little bit of everything is really important to us and really important to each of these markets, that we're giving people an entryway into that. And if they want to read more, right, like that's the whole point of the newsletter. They can go and click forward and click onward rather and learn more about that topic. But the reality is that most regular news consumers in a local market are not going to wake up in the morning and read 20, 30,000 words and spend 30 to 60 minutes of their day just reading into that. You might for your job, right? If that's your job and you have that moment in the morning and you're sitting there with a cup of coffee and you're like, all right, you might get into a little bit of that. And that gets to some of our, industry specific businesses. But if you're a local reader, the likelihood of you doing that is pretty low. And so we want to make sure that we're a quick, fast read in the morning. And that comes to smart brevity, something you mentioned before, right? The ability for us to get you smarter faster and have that really, really good signal to noise ratio where you're getting just that signal, right? That exactly what you need in that morning. And we want to make sure you have all those pieces to prepare you for the day, because all of us live somewhere, right? That's the kind of the thing that I think about in those local markets. And I wouldn't call us hyper local yet, but I think for Axios, like the ability to be there and be that voice, I think is super important.
I want to jump to smart brevity in just one moment, but I want to round out this conversation about Axios Local. I'm curious, what are your success metrics for the newsletters? And also, what's the business model? Or are you in an experimenting moment? Like, where are you in developing that?
So I will speak to the fact that I don't think we have it 100% figured out across all the things, right? Otherwise, we'd be in far more than 30 cities. I think for those 30 cities, some of the key metrics would be what is the uptake on the newsletter? So subscribers to that newsletter, do we retain those subscribers over a long period of time? That's really critical to us, that we're reaching them, they're opening, the open rate of that newsletter, do they click through? It's a little bit less important to us, but we want to be careful to sort of understand if people are engaging with that newsletter in some way. Replies to that newsletter, that's something I think about a lot, is if someone takes the time to reply to a newsletter, wow, that is insane engagement. You're basically making a huge commitment to send a reply back to a newsletter author. And we want to be there to be that person to write back to that reply, right? To surprise and delight that reader that often thinks, "Hey, I'm just one of thousands." The reality is that Axios reporters are very much so encouraged to reply back to readers all the time. If someone took the time to hit reply, they deserve a response in that way. And so, looking at that on the newsletter side of the business, I think that is really critical. That we continue to see and grow those markets as much as we can. We also look at sort of associated metrics in the kind of the wider swath of Axios local things, web traffic. That's something that I'm also spend a lot of time with. Are some of those same newsletter readers coming back to the web? Are we encouraging new readers from the web into newsletters? So some of the cross-pollination there. And then the latest piece, social. So some of the metrics there, are they part of that flywheel of social, web, and newsletters? And if so, that's amazing. If not, then, we're definitely looking at how are we, what is the uptake of followers? Are we getting some video views, especially on a platform like Instagram? that is really, really critical that we continue to see, good growth metrics in those spaces.
And the aspirations around the business model at this point are you looking at advertising as part of that, or are there different experiments that are happening now?
All and any and all ways to be sustainable, right? Like that's how hard local is, I think. And the ability to say, okay, yes, we need sponsorships and advertisements. Absolutely. That's definitely at the top of the list. But, do we also, mix in membership, job boards, right? We're also kind of trying to piece together a couple of these things because it's going to be different in different markets. That's the other thing that we talk about constantly. We say, okay, if you're a big city, Chicago, right? We have Axios Chicago. It's one of the best teams that we have in the, across the network. And that is a place that needs to support a slightly larger team and a slightly larger, ambition in the journalism space. And so how do we assemble that? It's going to look pretty different than, nearby Des Moines, right? Like it's gonna look a little different, but that's where you both want to sort of feel like you have figured out individual cities, but also the aggregate across all the cities. I would say that we're pretty careful not to overextend ourselves. And especially in a moment like this where we know that there are a lot of layoffs, there are a lot of places that can't keep this going. And so when we invest very carefully in how we continue to build on that model, knowing that we don't know everything, right? We're newbies in how we build out that network. And so that is something that I think has helped us a lot, not get over our skis on building out some of these cities. And so, oftentimes you might say, oh, well, there's only 2 reporters in said cities. Like, yeah, it's 2 more reporters than were there yesterday, right? If we start in a new city in that way. And it doesn't mean that there will always only be 2 people in that city, but it will mean that it's really that we have to be careful about how we match the investment and the ability to do great journalism in those places.
I have to contain myself because I could spend the rest of our time together just talking about local, and I believe you could as well. It is an incredibly important part of journalism, and it's exciting to see what Axios is doing there. I want to shift to talking about something that is smart brevity, which I think is one of the most brilliant products that Axios has developed. And, taking it from a format to a product in and of itself, a SaaS product, all built around the concept of, essentially clarity being kindness. That's the way I think of it. And clearly it's not just smart to me, it's smart to others. It was valued at 525 million in 2022. These are amazing figures and clear validation that this resonates with an audience, a very broad audience. I'm wondering, what can you tell me about smart brevity? I have a feeling like maybe you guys are just walking around the newsroom all the time, editing each other into this format. I have never been accused of being brief in my my own language. Curious, what is it as a format? Can you help me understand what it means to you to apply that every day? And then tell me a little bit about the product application, please.
One of the most mind-blowing things is we tend to also write our internal communications in smart brevity. And so when I tell people that, they're like, oh no, like it must be just for show, right? That's just how you when you write for readers or you speak with readers, right? Like that's the way it is. Like, no, we actually use it internally as well. And so it tends to be a little bit more on the formal side. So if you say, hey, I have a new proposal or something in that way, you might be using smart brevity in your pitch, for instance, to an executive or to other executives. That's pretty common in sort of casual communications. Like, if you're on Slack and you're just going back and forth. That's actually probably not the moment for smart brevity. That's just kind of pure regular kind of chat speak in that way. But smart brevity in general, is a really, really helpful communication tool. And you're right, it's absolutely a format. And so for the way that I have broken it down for people is when you see smart brevity in the wild, it's oftentimes bold and bullets is kind of how I put it out there. Because again, I'm in the business of getting people who don't know anything about Axios and getting them to know something about Axios. And so one of the most convincing tools that I can use is teaching them something about smart brevity. They might learn about smart brevity before they learn actually the brand name Axios. And that's really cool to have almost like a stylistic thing that people can recognize out there on the internet. Now, like, I will throw out there the fact that other news organizations use similar types of formats. I will out myself in sort of saying, yes, when the New York Times puts together a smart brevity like article, that I will be the one to put that into the company Slack and say, hey, little smart brevity from our competitors at the New York Times. That's always a fun moment when we do that. But in reality, it's a reflection of how readers read on the internet today. Like, this is the sort of comes back to, and you can listen to Jim and Mike talk about this over the years, but really it's the idea that very few people read every single word of an article. Very few people read all the way down an article. And so the ability for readers to scan and get the most important piece is really, really important. And so Mike often talks about this. Is Mike Allen, co-founder of Axios, talks about it's not just brief and it's not just smart. It's smart and brief together. And that really is the key to kind of bringing things together. And I look at that and say, how can we apply that across all the platforms that Axios is on? And so it's not just, hey, when you read a web article, you get that, or when you get a newsletter from Axios, do you get that? You should also get that feeling and that format on social, right? That's something that's really important as we move into visual formats. How do you get that from an illustration, for instance? That is something that we think and we talk about a lot. And the ability for smart brevity to kind of reach people, really, I have not found the bottom of that well. It's one of the coolest things to be able to sort of put that out there and not really know how far it can go, because like we haven't even found that yet. And that's part of the journey the organization is on, and very, very cool to be a part of.
I know that I imagine it's outside of the newsroom, but the product application of smart brevity, is there anything you can share about that? It's so fascinating to me.
So when Axios Media was sold to Cox Enterprises, I believe it was now a little over 2 summers ago, one of the outputs of that was we spun off a company called Axios HQ. It was already operating as a separate entity, but the idea that if Cox Enterprises was going to buy Axios Media, they were not going to buy Axios HQ. And so that SaaS product is actually fully its own company now. We co-locate into the same offices in Arlington, Virginia. But so I see my former colleagues now in the office all the time. But that product is really a way for users to think about internal communication, particularly in that kind of corporate environment. But it works in nonprofits, any kind of communication. A place that you need communication in an internal sense. So unlike the external newsletters that Axios Media sends, right? Like most organizations are usually sending some communications within their teams and within their organization that most of the outside world never sees. And so that is that tool that really, really works well. I am so bullish on Axios HQ. It has really, really helped me become a better communicator. As an executive, as a team leader, as a journalist, I'll even say, like the ability for us to think about delivering internal communications in a kind of chunky format that uses smart brevity. It borrows smart brevity in that way. And so some of the sort of auto prompting, you'll see kind of like it auto populates the bottom line, or it will auto populates like why it matters in that way. And that's super helpful. Because it reminds you as you start writing about all the things that an organization might be needing today, in that way, you're saying, okay, but actually, like, remember how people read on the internet or in their inboxes. They want to know the bottom line. So write the bottom line and tell them, like, okay, you need to attend the meeting at 2 p.m. next Tuesday, right? Like, if that's the bottom line, say that, as opposed to writing, 5,000 words and saying, oh, I'm pontificating as an executive on all these different things, right? Like, that piece of software is so good at bringing those pieces out. And now, like, I don't even get paid to say that anymore, right? That's just like me as a user of Axios HQ. And a really cool output of being part of Axios Media has been the ability to kind of work with HQ both when we were one entity and when now as separate organizations.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible tool and a really important way of thinking, certainly from an audience engagement perspective. The amount of times that I've worked with pieces of writing where the most important detail is down at the bottom or the eighth paragraph or what have you. And it's not just that people are lazy and not reading things, but it's a way to deepen engagement. If I know why this matters, then I will stick around and read the entire piece and invest in it. So, and I see it in your newsletters. The newsletters obviously follow this format. I want to spend some time talking about your newsletters because it's such a pivotal and important part of the work you do. So maybe you could tell me just a little bit about the secret to success, what you're willing to share around the newsletters. But I'm also picking up something that you've mentioned a few times now about the relationship between web traffic and the newsletters and this flywheel, obviously, with social as well. Can you tell me a little bit about the secret to success? And also, how does that connect to your other goals?
So I think, the secrets of newsletters are pretty well known. I think there's a lot of really good resources out there about how to do great newsletter work. Usually, if you read anything on this topic, it's about consistency. And so I will make a plug for consistency. You have to be consistent about delivering a newsletter. That is what we live, breathe, and die by every single day. There's a reason we're on a daily cadence. There's a reason that it comes out in the morning. All of that is in service of developing a habit. Because that's the flip side of the consistency, right? You may talk about that as a business as, hey, I'm delivering this consistently. But from the user point of view, I'm building this newsletter into my habit as a daily habit. You can also have a weekly habit, you can have a monthly habit. But for the most part, if you don't do something every day, you're not really invested in that particular thing. And we'll save the productivity hacks for another podcast in that way. So I would say that that's really, really critical as we look at that. And we see that across our portfolio, right? The ability to deliver daily at a specified time. We've started looking at other ways to deliver newsletters in a really important kind of fashion. And that includes ways that are not always every single morning at 7 o'clock in the morning. So when news happens, especially with really industry specific things, you'll see this in our pro business, right? We're delivering exclusive, scoopy information when people need it, because that's when the news happened in that way. So that's more of like an alerts type strategy in that way. I see the kind of the ebb and the flow of newsletters and the web and social kind of trying to think about those different cadences and building different habits out there. I think the reality is you kind of go in and out of a lot of these different, as a user, you go in and out of a lot of these different platforms, right? How many times you're sitting, you're waiting in line and you're scrolling on Instagram, right? Because you need that 1 minute of just okay, I can't think about anything else right now. I got 50 things on my to-do list. I got people yelling at me in different ways. Let me just I got to zone out for a second. And so then you're scrolling on Instagram or maybe TikTok, right? I think the reality is social is really, really important in those moments, right? As a sort of almost a lean back experience, especially the more video centric a social platform becomes. Whereas on the web, right? We're really looking at the web more as a search-driven experience. Okay, well, hey, I'm looking for something specific. I'm doing specific research. I'm looking for a piece of information. And the web has sort of been everything for a long time. But as social and web and newsletters have kind of gone different directions, I think for me, as I look at the sort of outlook of like all the different ways these things interact with each other, I really look at web oftentimes is when the reader is looking for something specific. And so how do we, as a news organization, deliver in that moment? Oftentimes it's through a little SEO, thinking about how do we meet the reader with their query in that moment. And then back to newsletters, right? The ability for us to build that habit over time. Now you can kind of place those in different places of the funnel, but of the marketing funnel. But I think ultimately the idea is that it should be pretty fluid back and forth across these things. We build newsletters mostly to be consumed within the inbox, but right, if a topic piques your interest as a user, click through. We got way, way, way more on the web, and that's amazing. And so the ability for you to go from newsletter web, I think, is an important piece because, and so this gets into my sort of analytics brain, I know a lot less about you in your inbox than I do on the web in that way. Especially we can get you all registered and all the, the ability to kind of do some cross-platform identification is really, 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 really critical there. But it is all tied together by that first-party email address now, and the ability for us to sort of say, hey, across all these things, we can provide you the experience that you need for what you're trying to do in that moment. And if we don't have your email address, right, that's okay, right? Like, come down the funnel with us. We will guide you to a place where you end up being matched with a subject matter expert or someone that you're like, hey, I love hearing from Dan Primack every single day. That's my guy at Axios. I want to hear from Dan because he's amazing. Or I'm really looking forward. My person is my local writer in my particular city. You might have a couple people in your life. And if we have done a good job at that, we can get you to your person that you know in the Axios universe. And then we can kind of build out that universe in that way and say, okay, you might also, know a couple of these other names, and they kind of can be as supporting characters to your sort of media diet.
It's so smart. I think it's a very holistic way of looking at this and meeting the audience where it is. I'm curious, what's the pathway that takes someone successfully from being a free subscriber to a newsletter to funneling them into paid products? You at the very beginning, you were saying, that your audience, they are smart professionals, and obviously that might show up in different ways if we're talking about local versus somebody who's following policy reporting. What are some of the steps that you have to take to help to usher qualified audiences into that space? And are there any insights that you have gleaned from that process of offering that?
You said the word qualified. That's an excellent term for all of this. I think, we're still working on a lot of these pieces, right? And as any, young business is kind of maturing in that way, we have to kind of start plugging these pieces in and seeing how that sort of flywheel works all in one. So I think we have a great ambition to move people between these places. But for the most part, right, it starts with having an awareness of what Axios is in general. Smart. That's why the smart brevity or smart, get you smarter faster really, really matters, because that is across the portfolio. It doesn't matter if you're a, very high-end pro subscriber or you are on the very first free newsletter that you have ever experienced, right? That's the through line. And so it starts there. And then, I think part of it is we have some work to do to be able to sort of get people to the right place in that way. Obviously, I think the email address becomes the sort of unlock. It's not new information. A lot of great businesses do it this way. The New York Times does it this way. But the free to paid thing is really, really interesting from my perspective. And I'm just sort of speaking on this, like personally, idea here that right now we run very good and standalone products in that way. Like in some ways, we don't need every single free user to make it to be a pro subscriber in that way, and that's okay, right? But over time, right, we do want to see this sort of connective tissue kind of come together.
So I want to make sure that we have a chance to talk a little bit more about social media and off platform in general, and also just innovations that are out there. I know before Axios, you had experimented deeply with the innovation groups that were the first to platform to experiment on platforms like Reddit, Tumblr, Twitch, etc. And then obviously the work that you did at the Washington Post with a very successful Instagram team. I'm wondering how you're currently applying those insights and lessons into distribution and engagement tactics in 2024 when so much ink has been spilled about the demise of social media and the demise of organic in general. I'm just wondering, like, what still feels juicy to you, and where are you doubling down on that kind of engagement work?
Super hard environment right now to be able to navigate and come together with like a really coherent thesis on this. And that just speaks to me or sort of tells me that there's actually more a need to experiment, not a less need to experiment now, especially on social platforms. And so when you are in a period of time of great uncertainty, right, that's actually when you want to be sort of putting the most sort of, pedal to the metal on, hey, what's next? What are the things that can serve us, potentially year 2, 5 down the road as part of that. And so, rewinding to that moment that you mentioned in the Washington Post history, there was a great need for experimentation because we knew that at that time we were really Facebook heavy, right? We were like, okay, like the social Facebook equals social. And so that was amazing, but we knew like, hey, it's not going to be that way forever. In fact, my boss at the time, Emilio Garcia Ruiz, sort of said like, I need to ensure that you have heard of and are working on something like the platform names that come up before the publisher comes to Emilio and says, hey, what are we doing on Y platform, right? Like, the idea that we had something already underway. And so that was really, really important at that time to also look at that sort of national scale that we were looking at. Because like the Post was not really a national player like the Journal or the Times was at the time. The ability for us to sort of really kind of scale up in that moment was really Facebook dependent. And so the ability to hedge a little bit against that was really, really critical. And so that moment of uncertainty that felt good for a lot of people because traffic numbers go up and video numbers go up, and some of that was a little juiced by various platforms, as we know now. The ability to have some other ideas of what was happening on the social web was really really critical. And so fast forward to where we are now, it's not going so hot overall, but that uncertainty remains, right? What is that next thing? People thought it was Snap for a while. People thought it was going to be, okay, it was Twitter, and then it was really not Twitter. And then it was going to be, okay, how do we kind of get into TikTok, right? The talk of the town. And so how do we do that? And so behind the success of all these like amazing channels that you see out there, like chances are those channels existed years before you discovered them. Right. And so that's the kind of secret is you have to have something going in a lot of these spaces and take some chances in that way. And so I am really kind of a little bit of a back to the future kind of pieces of this. Like I'm really hot on Reddit right now as where we are in the landscape. I think it meets a lot of needs in a social space. It also meets an SEO need now with Reddit kind of porting into Google so heavily. So you might get like a 2-for-1 in that Reddit space that could be really, really juicy in that way. There's something really interesting about spaces that are less brand heavy. So I've always had this idea that you don't want to be, you don't want to get into a social network when all the brands are already on that platform. You want to be on that social network before all the brands get there. And so you look at a place like Be Real, or you look at some of these smaller kind of things that are coming out there that are like, oh yeah, we kind of want brands, but all the major brands are not there yet. And so that's kind of how I think about the different types of experimentation that are required. And they oftentimes require different types of skills from your audience team. So video, is going to be a way bigger piece of this. Audio, the sort of transformation from a really text-based to a little bit more visual has been really true. Final one I'll throw out there, or final two I'll throw out there, Threads. This is the moment for Threads. That might not be the case by the time this podcast publishes, but Threads is a kind of, I think, a really, really important piece of the landscape right now, because it feels like early Twitter, which like really turns a lot of those sort of early Twitter people on to kind of make that jump over. And you can see at the speed at which they're releasing features, it's really, really critical in that space. The last one is WhatsApp. Always been one of the experiments I ran back at the Washington Post was chat apps. How do we get into those spaces? And those chat apps weren't really friendly to publishers back then. And WhatsApp now has really spent a lot of time saying, okay, we actually do want publishers in a very limited way, right? Still meta, still going to be a kind of a little bit of a box to put you in. But hey, that's a box that didn't exist before. And so we're really hunting for anything that can really get us a foothold for what might be down the road in that way. And so I think just because a platform fails or succeeds in what your goals are as an organization, like, great, that's fine. But like, chances are the insight from doing something on that platform can apply elsewhere in your organization, right? Like I see what The Verge is doing, right? Like building a feed on their homepage. Like, yeah, like where'd that come from? Like they took that from social because they were like, hey, we know the insights that we've learned from Twitter. We've known the insights of what we've learned from these algorithmic spaces. How about we put that on our homepage? Like that's a bet. That is a real clear bet on using the insights that they've taken from other places and putting it into their own work. And so I look at that as how do we use those same insights we get from elsewhere and make that Axios specific, or even personal brand specific on sort of what you're building for your upcoming year.
I think you just summed up the ethos of audience development, like really smart audience development, experimenting out on these different platforms, seeing what you're learning about your audience in those different spaces, and then running it through that filter, like you just said, what applies to Axios. So the feed that you describe on The Verge, I think, is a brilliant bet and is really shows an understanding of their audience. Same thing in what you're describing. What are you seeing on these different platforms that is specific to those smart professionals and will help you meet their needs? I would posit, smart brevity. I'm just going to say, I think Twitter back in the day forced us to, really work within these constraints and to think through what does it look like to speak in concise manners like that in an effective way. We are almost out of time, but I really want to make sure we like to explore the different dimensions of our guests outside of work. And first of all, I wanted to congratulate you, Ryan. I know that you are expecting soon. And so from everybody at MACMA, we wanted to congratulate you and wish you the best of luck with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I did a little bit of internet sleuthing, otherwise known as a Google search, and learned that you're a bit of a foodie. I loved taking a look at your Instagram feed, which is beautifully photographed. But here's the thing that I was most excited about. What is the best egg sandwich in DC? It seems that we have an expert here, and I wanted to hear a little bit about the methodology that you enacted to find that best egg sandwich in DC.
Absolutely. So last year, obviously the Axios DC, the specific DC branch of Axios Local, right, covers food and drink in the DC area, and they gave me a chance to go out there and find the best I guess it was breakfast sandwich. It's not specifically, a bacon, egg, and cheese, for instance. I sort of looked at that a little bit broadly. I found that I had kind of a short list that I went to. I ended up eating, I think, like maybe 10, maybe 12 spots, and couple times for some of those places. I particularly am a fan of Pearl's Bagels. I think that is among the best. It's a sort of Montreal style bagel in the DC area. Helps that I live close to there as well. I can walk there, but that's probably not the most objective piece of information. Look, like the best sandwiches is breakfast sandwich is definitely one that is just simple and is executed really, really, really cleanly in that way. That's easy to eat. That's delicious, right? That's usually what people are looking for in that moment. I will say that I did get some hate mail due to on my piece. As a person who started in community management, you always get feedback, and the feedback was that I had slighted some of the DC greats in this way, including bagels, etc., baker's daughter. And so I will have to revisit my list this year, perhaps, and go with an updated list or choose a whole new category, because who knows? Like, I don't think I can kind of keep up with where people are on the best breakfast sandwich in Washington, D.C.
Well, I hear that, like new dads definitely have a lot of time on their hands. So like maybe there's a part two. Um, Ryan, I wanted to quote you back from the beginning. You were talking about a mission to be generous, give ideas, and share what you know, and the full 180 that you've done in your personal life and professional life and sharing. And I just wanted to thank you for showing up today in that spirit and providing us with so much information and insight. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Carla. It's really fun to be here and get to kind of a little bit talk shop, right? A lot of these conversations get kind of buried in, little pockets when you pull someone aside at a conference, or you get those little nuggets. And I'm just grateful to be able to share what I can, and hope others can kind of take the baton and bring whatever insight that they can to what they're working on.
Great. And Ryan, if anybody wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach out?
I'm now a LinkedIn convert, so you should find me on LinkedIn. That's the kind of spot. That's probably because of the demise of a certain bird app in my life, and so LinkedIn's definitely a spot. You can just find my name, Ryan Kellett, on there. Otherwise, I'm occasionally on the bird app too. So if that's still your preferred communication method, I will connect with you there.
Amazing. Thank you again, and look forward to our paths crossing again.
Awesome. Thanks, Carla.
Audience Architect is a content service of MACMA, the Media, Audience, and Content Marketers Association. Supercharge your career with MACMA's paid membership. Connect with industry experts, thought leaders, and like-minded professionals. Expand your knowledge and stay ahead with networking events, webinars, and conferences. Join MACMA today for unparalleled value and professional growth. Check us out at www.themacma.org. Thanks again to MACMA for supporting Audience Architect Podcast. Shout out to my excellent producer and editor, Camillo Duque of Victoria Records, available to work on your music, podcast, or movie soundtrack. Write me with your feedback on the show and topic ideas for future episodes. The good and ugly. You can contact me, Carla Zanoni, at carla@carlazanoni.com, or our regular host, Bill Levine, at bml0217 That's bml0217 at gmail.com.